Aloha, my name is Hadley Anderson. I'm a science educator here at the Bishop Museum, and we're in the Bishop Museum's Library and Archives today with DeSoto Brown, who is our historian. So DeSoto, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, we are going to talk about Duke Kahanamoku. Duke Kahanamoku is probably the most famous Hawaiian who ever lived. And Bishop Museum is about to do a Duke Kahanamoku exhibit, which is going to open on August 9th, 2015. It is going to close probably November 30th, 2015, unless it gets carried over because it's very public. And we are the right people to be doing this exhibit because we have the best collection of Duke Kahanamoku material there is. And that's because we were very fortunate enough to receive from Duke's widow, Nani Kahanamoku, the bulk of the material that related to her late husband's life and the memorabilia that he owned. And particularly, what we're going to be looking at today are photographs. We have hundreds and hundreds of photographs of Duke Kahanamoku.
That's fantastic. Well, I know that Duke was really famous. He did a lot of things. He was an Olympian, he was an athlete, he brought surfing to different countries.
Right.
He was also a movie star, and he was a sheriff for a short time.
Actually, for a long time.
Oh, for a long time.
For a long time. Actually, okay, this is a cool thing because it's good that, I'm going to be able to talk to you about this because you do obviously know some stuff about Duke, but there's probably a lot you don't know about Duke. And that's one of the things we want to tell people with this exhibit is this man was really multifaceted, and he was really talented, and he was really photogenic, and he's really a very cool guy. And there are a lot of people who still know him very well and are still very impressed by Duke. Okay, so hello everybody out there. I'm going to be holding up photographs. You're going to be seeing some of them. Hadley, you can ask me about them, and I'll talk about them. And cameraman, how are you with how I'm doing this? Is this working okay? You just let me know. It does look okay. All right, everybody. To start with, here's an early photograph of Duke, and there aren't that many pictures of him when he was a child. Duke was born in 1890, and one of the fascinating things about his life is that he lived through an amazing transition of governments here in the Hawaiian Islands. At the time of his birth in 1890, he was living in the Kingdom of Hawaii, which was ruled by King Kalakaua. In January of 1893, Kalakaua's successor, Queen Liliuokalani, was overthrown. In 1898, Hawaii was annexed by the United States and became a territory in 1900. And then later in Duke's life, he lived to see Hawaii become the 50th state in 1959. So he lived through a whole bunch of stuff. Well, in this particular photograph, this is Duke here, very obviously. And he's wearing the uniform of the Kamehameha schools because he was a student of the Kamehameha School for Boys from 1905 to 1910 or thereabouts.
But am I correct in saying that he didn't graduate?
He did not graduate because he went to work. However, here he is as a student. I do not know who that man is, so we're not going to talk about him. But the cool thing is that the Kamehameha Boys School was located right here on the grounds of what's now Bishop Museum. So it's also a wonderful thing that we're talking about Duke because this was a part of his life. These very grounds were what his life. All right, you mentioned swimmer. Mm-hmm. Did you not mention swimmer?
I did. Olympian.
You did? Yeah, that's right. Okay, so here is Duke Kahanamoku as a swimmer. Duke Kahanamoku became famous initially because of his swimming prowess. And in 1911, there was a swim meet in Honolulu at which Duke broke one of the existing world records. And the American Amateur Athletic Association, the AAU, said, oh, no, that can't be right. He couldn't have broken that. He couldn't have broken that world record. And in fact, he did. So once that was confirmed, Duke went to the mainland United States and he trained a lot more. And he qualified to represent the United States in the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm, Sweden. And he won 2 swimming medals. And this photograph shows Duke being given his gold medal by the King of Sweden. And on Duke's head, right where am I? Right there, thank you. He looks like he's wearing a head lei. Mm-hmm. Here in Hawaii, that's one of the ways you can wear a lei of leaves and flowers is on your head. He's actually wearing a laurel wreath, which is a traditional Olympic thing that harkens back to ancient Greece. Duke kept that laurel wreath. He was very proud of it. It's in a frame. We have it in the collection, the same one that he's wearing in this picture.
That's fantastic. Do we also have his medals too?
We have his medals. He eventually won 6 medals in Olympics. He was he participated in 4 Olympics. And after he won the first gold medal, or the 2 medals at the 1912 Olympics, he became internationally famous because at that time, of course, the Olympics were primarily European people participating. And the fact that there was a native Hawaiian representing the United States who won a medal was considered like a really cool, amazing thing. So that's what initially made him famous. Well, this is a photograph of Duke in the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles. And he is at the docks in Los Angeles looking for his luggage amongst other luggage from, I think this is from the Australian team. So Duke won a total of 6 Olympic medals, and we have 4 of them in the collection here, and they are going to be on exhibit, along with a lot of other medals and trophies that he won.
Fantastic.
It is fantastic. Now, you also mentioned surfing.
Yes.
And Duke was a surfer. Duke grew up in Waikiki. And today, Waikiki is a really crowded urban area for anybody who's been here and knows what it looks like now. But when Duke grew up, it was still a lot more rural. This is where he learned to surf. This is where he learned to swim. This is where he learned to paddle a canoe and also fish. And he was fortunate that he was able to go to Waikiki for his entire life for recreation and for enjoyment, which is what he did from when he was a child. This photograph was taken probably about 1912, and it's Duke with one of his surfboards, as you can see, with the name Duke on it. Well, he had more than one surfboard in his lifetime, and here's a picture from probably about 1920 with another board with the word Duke on it and 2 admirers. He had a lot of admirers. And Duke continued to surf until he was a pretty old man, I mean, into his 60s. As you said, Duke is really famous in Australia and New Zealand for introducing longboard surfing, because in both countries there were people who were surfing to a limited degree just using small boards. Duke showed up in December 1914 and January and February of 1915. He made a board while he was in Australia, demonstrated surfing, and wowed everybody. And that is what, I mean, Australia is a huge surfing country, and they revere Duke for introducing surfing. Here's a picture of Duke in about 1950, surfing at Waikiki. And he's a 60-year-old man in this photograph. He remained in extremely good physical shape and very active up until the time of his death. Mm-hmm. But as I said, Waikiki was his playground, and Duke was a really lucky man. He was able to do a lot of the things he liked for most of his life. Yep. Okay, now Duke is also famous kind of for being the ambassador of aloha for the Hawaiian Islands and Hawaiian culture. Mm-hmm. And Duke was in fact pure Hawaiian, and he was very much connected to Hawaiian culture. He spoke Hawaiian language fluently, as well as English, of course. And so, because he was a handsome guy, and because he was always well dressed, and he carried himself so well, he was kind of the ceremonial greeter for the Hawaiian Islands, and he interacted with a lot of famous people when they came to town. So this is a picture of Duke with one of his buddies, who is Johnny Weissmuller, who had been a swimming competitor, a friendly swimming competitor in the 1920s in various swimming competitions, but they became friends. Johnny Weissmuller became a movie star in the 1930s and was in movies through the 1950s and 60s. So this is Duke and Johnny Weissmuller in the early 1950s. They're both older and wiser, but they're still buddies. And a lot of celebrities came to the Hawaiian Islands, and they still do come to the Hawaiian Islands. And Duke, as the famous guy, would greet them. And so this is Shirley Temple in 1935. Shirley Temple, at that time, was the biggest movie star in the whole world. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, she's just a child, but Duke greeted her along with all kinds of other people. And in later years, when she continued to visit, they still would socialize because they knew each other. And Shirley Temple in 1949 came back. She was a divorcee. She divorced her first husband. She met her second husband here and got married. So then she came and visited a lot. Another of Duke's friends was a radio and TV personality named Arthur Godfrey. And Arthur Godfrey today is not that well known, but in the 1950s he was one of the most famous media people in the whole USA, and he had a very popular radio show as well as multiple TV shows. So this guy was in everybody's attention. He and Duke became quite good friends. And Arthur would come out and visit the Hawaiian Islands frequently in the 50s and then talk about Hawaii on his radio show and his TV show, and he would wear all his shirts and play the ukulele. And one of the reasons was he was so friendly with Duke that's why he wanted to come back and visit.
Nice.
Yes.
Now, did Duke live for a time on the mainland in California?
He did. Actually, that's an absolutely perfect segue into, because, yeah, Duke lived in California from 1922 to 1929, and he lived in Los Angeles. And I'm not really sure why he moved there, and I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but while he was there, he got into movies. So in Los Angeles, 1920s, center of film production in the USA, Duke got into the movies, and here's a funny picture. This is Duke in 1926, and he looks very much like a present-day hipster because he's got a beard. No, but I mean, look at his beard, and the fact that his mustache is waxed. So, you know, this could be a hipster beard of 2015. Well, he grew this beard for a role in a movie, which was called Old Ironsides, which was a pirate movie, and here he is in that movie in about 1925, 26, and there's Duke with the hipster beard and with the movie camera. So that's the type of movie camera that was used in Hollywood at that time. It was hand cranked, so somebody stood there and moved their hand like this, and so Duke is posing with the camera. We don't know exactly how many movies Duke made in the 1920s in Hollywood, because most of those silent films don't exist anymore because of deterioration, so we can't go back and look at them to confirm how many roles he played. And a lot of them were small roles, so he probably didn't even get billed in the credits, so we don't know for sure. But anyway, he played all these different types of roles, and he was always kind of an exotic character. So he's a pirate, or he's somebody from, you know, the Indian Ocean, or he's an African, or he's an Arab, or something like that. So this is one of those films. What is this called? This is called The Rescue, 1928. And you can see he's on a sailing ship, but I mean, I'm not sure what ethnicity he's supposed to be.
Right.
He's exotic. Well, he later, he made a few more movies after that, and the movie that he had the biggest role in was 1949. The movie was called Wake of the Red Witch, and he played a Polynesian, so that's good, because it was like what he really was.
Yeah.
But he was good friends with John Wayne. He became friends with John Wayne.
So Duke and the Duke.
Duke, right. So John Wayne also was called Duke Wayne and Duke Kahanamoku, so Duke and Duke were buddies. So here's a photo from that movie, and I always like this one too because it looks really phony Hollywood with the big moai in the background. That's the big, you know, idol, the big tiki god. And
right.
There's this whole, I can't remember, there's a pool right in front of them which has a fortune in pearls, and it's guarded by a giant octopus, and John Wayne jumps in and kills the octopus and gets the pearls out of it. And then behind them there's like a fire pit that bad people get thrown into. You know, it's very hokey, but
yeah,
that's why we like it.
Of course.
Now, so this is Duke, you know, what you might expect that he did. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily expect that he was a movie star, but you would expect he was a swimmer or a surfer. But Duke was also a businessman, and in ways that people probably wouldn't really realize. And one of the things that he did in his life was he, 3 times during his life, he licensed his name and likeness for production of clothing. So he did it in 1930s, and he did it in 1950, and then he did it in 1961. So this is from 1950, and this photograph is obviously a staged picture of its publicity photograph. And it's at Waikiki, and here is Duke, and this is an executive from the Cisco company, which was the manufacturer of the clothing, which is called Duke Kahanamoku. That was the brand name. And they're both wearing outfits made of the Duke Kahanamoku brand. Mm-hmm. And in this photograph, Duke is supposedly looking at patterns to decide whether he okays them or not. Well, he actually did look at the patterns and say yes or no for his own line of clothing. And in fact, he had some commissioned by people here and sent them to the company. So he was not just sort of a passive, he really was a participant.
Yeah, I knew that he had he had licensed his name at least for a couple restaurants and things like that.
Correct, yeah. And in later years, so this again is from his Cisco years, and that again is an outfit of Duke Kahanamoku brand clothing, and that's what's called a kabanya set, meaning it's matching shirt and boxer-style trunks. Mm-hmm. It's very cool in the 50s. In 1961, he did a more sort of substantial licensing agreement with a man named Kimo McVeigh, who served as his business manager, and that was when they branched out from just doing clothing to doing surfboards, doing skateboards, doing shoes that were aloha print tennis shoes, and
this would be a huge hit today.
I know, they're very cool. They're very cool looking, and the Duke Kahanamoku's restaurant and nightclub, which was located in the International Marketplace in Waikiki. There's a current day Duke's restaurant, of which there are maybe 5 or 6 in California, Hawaii. Those were not actually connected to Duke. Those came along much later after his death. But they continue to use his name in the same way that was done before. Well, Duke was also very big on joining fraternal organizations. And that was very typical for men of his time period. You joined the Shriners and the Elks, and you did good works, but you also got to buddy up with all your buddies and have parties and go to conventions and stuff. Mm-hmm. So here is Duke as a Shriner, and probably this is at a Shriners convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey, in 1959. So again, Duke could do these things for fun, just for socializing, but also every time he was doing stuff like that, he was publicizing Hawaii. So everybody was really happy, like, oh yeah, famous Duke Kahanamoku goes places, and people find out about the Hawaiian Islands, and maybe they want to come here as tourists. Mm-hmm. And Duke was a really exceptionally well-traveled man for his time period. He first traveled from the Hawaiian Islands. I mean, born in 1890, he didn't necessarily think he was ever going to see any place outside of Hawaii, because travel in those days was really arduous. I mean, it took a long time to get any place.
Arduous, long, expensive?
Yeah, expensive, yeah. Exactly. He, in 1911 and 1912, not only traveled across the entire North American continent, but traveled all the way to Europe. Came home, 1914 and 15, traveled to Australia and New Zealand, and then for the rest of his life, he traveled a great deal. So this is a photo of him in the 1930s getting on a Pan American Airways plane, and flying in the 1930s of itself was very few people did it because it was expensive. And he, by the 40s and 50s was a really experienced traveler who'd been all over the world.
So some of the people, some of the only Hawaiians that ever got to travel this much were Waikiki. They were
to a degree, but there were also a lot of Hawaiians who traveled around for business purposes. Like there were a lot of musicians and dancers because Hawaiian music became popular in the teens and 20s. So there were people who did, in fact, as entertainers, travel all over the world, and some of them never came home because they just kept traveling, and then they might settle in another country or the United States mainland. But there were a few of them. I mean, as you just said, there weren't a heck of a lot of people doing this. Mm-hmm. So Duke was really exceptional. Duke lived until 1968. He died very suddenly and surprisingly and shockingly, actually, in January of 1968. And I can remember turning on the radio and hearing a bulletin that he had died, and it was really a shock. Even though he had been ill, you sort of don't expect it. So this is Duke's funeral, and it took place at Waikiki. And his ashes, he was cremated, and his ashes were taken out to sea in a traditional Beach Boy funeral fashion and put in the ocean. And then everybody paddled back in or surfed their canoes back in. And that was the end of Duke. As you can see, it was thousands of people were at Waikiki for this event. But even though Duke had died, he remained famous and remarkably is still really famous today. And a lot of people still know him, and not just in the Hawaiian Islands, but in a lot of different places. So I'm thinking that our Duke exhibit, again, that starts August 9th, 2015, ends November 30th, 2015. I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy it, and it's not just going to be a passive experience because they're going to be interactive things that you can do physically to.
I heard there's something about trying a surfboard.
Yeah, you can exactly. You can. Duke had an exceptionally long surfboard ride off Waikiki in 1917, so it's going to be sort of a recreation of that. You can get on a small surfboard which actually moves.
Oh my gosh.
And then you look at a screen in front of you, and your position on the board determines where you are going offshore of Waikiki. And then we have this other really good thing. You know, Duke is a champion swimmer, right?
Right.
So you can race Duke. And you do that by, the exercise cycles that you normally pedal with your feet.
Yeah.
Well, we've got 2 of those. And you move them with your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at a screen, and Duke is in the center lane, and you and the other person are on the side lanes, and you pedal as fast as you can to try to beat Duke. And Duke is actually swimming at the pace which he did in the 1912 Olympics. So if you think you can beat Duke,
I don't think I can beat Duke.
I don't think you can beat Duke. I've tried it. I don't think you can beat Duke.
No.
So there are other interactive things, but there are also lots of photographs and a lot of the artifacts too. So I mentioned, of course, as we said, he won all kinds of trophies and medals. So we got a lot of trophies and medals.
Yeah.
We have a lot of personal things that belong to him. And anyway, I've been on the committee working on this for months. Of course, I'm very immersive, but it is going to be fun.
And this is starting August 9th, which is actually Duke's birthday is August 24th.
Correct.
And this will be his 125th
That's right.
anniversary birthday.
That's right. That's right.
And
So that's one of the reasons we're doing it.
Yeah.
And the other cool thing is that Bishop Museum is 1 year older than Duke. So last year Bishop Museum had its 125th anniversary, and this year Duke is having his 125th. So we're gonna do those things.
This is fantastic. Well, thank you so much, DeSoto, for
You're very welcome.
today and
You're very
sharing
welcome.
these amazing photos. And come and see our Duke Kahanamoku exhibit starting
Absolutely.
August 9th.
Yes. And now we're still live.
Yes.
How do people ask questions?
Well, they ask it through Twitter, or through, I don't know, Nick, have you seen anything pop up?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, maybe next time. If we continue this every Thursday,
Yeah.
this is our Throwback Thursday.
Yeah.
We can probably talk some more about Duke next week.
We can talk about all kinds of things because let me just put in a plug for the archives. Bishop Museum Archives, where I work, has the largest historic photo collection in Hawai'i Islands. It has the largest moving image historic collection in the Hawai'i Islands. That means film and video. We have a lot of amazing, wonderful treasures just here in the archives, not counting the rest of Bishop Museum, which you're going to be doing these other.
Hopefully, yeah.
I mean, no, you will, because we're going to be showing a lot more wonderful stuff. And so there's tons of stuff to show. There's no lack of things to show. So, hello everybody out there. Please do keep watching us because we'll be showing a lot of wonderful, fun things which I know you're going to.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.